Hello everyone, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, our weekly look at the world of business and finance. Coming up, as China flexes its military muscles in honour of a communist revolution, we look at the 60 years of economic revolution. Getting a foot on the ladder in Egypt, why there is seemingly no recession in the country's property market. And the untapped potential of Central Asia as Kazakhstan tries to dig its way out of recession. So a real smorgasbord for you this week on Counting the Cost. Central Asia, the Arab world, Latin America, all featuring. But we are going to start this week in the Far East, China. It is 60 years since communism made its mark on China, and the People's Republic celebrated with a carefully orchestrated display of military power. But those celebrations also mark an extraordinary pace in economic growth. Yes, there has been a global financial crisis, but if anything, it's ended up highlighting China's strength. And with the establishment of the G20 as the world's premier financial forum, this communist nation has truly established its position as a leading world economy. With more on the Chinese economic phenomenon, here's Taimur Nabili in our Kuala Lumpur Broadcast Centre.
Yes, for some 30 years, China's leaders have been working to transform the economy from an agriculture-based backwater to being the factory of the world. And the growth has been the envy of the world. In the process, 500 million people have been lifted out of poverty. And all this as Russia has experienced a dramatic economic collapse after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. This year, China's poised to overtake Japan and become the second biggest economy in the world. Melissa Chan reports from Shaanxi province now on how the growth has helped reduce poverty in one of the world's largest economies.
The end of the road, where the Red Army, after 2 years and thousands of kilometers, could finally lay down their arms and rest. This is Shaanxi, a land of brown hills and cave dwellings into one which Mao Zedong would live for the next few years. Here he would rebuild the communist forces, weakened to now just a few thousand soldiers. The communists survived on this, the very first oil wells drilled in China. The region was and still is an area rich in oil and coal. Back then, the communists played smart capitalists, funding their revolution with petroleum. Today, they've come full circle. Natural resources are the driving force behind China's outstanding economic growth over the last 3 decades. In Mao's time, this was countryside, and the peasants here some of the earliest beneficiaries of the communist system. For Chinese, it is the legendary site of the first socialist utopia.
What's different today from 60 years ago is what's happening here. Not all of the farmland is being used in the hills behind me. A lot of the land has been left alone, and that's because farmers don't find it profitable, and many of them have left the countryside in order to work in the cities.
It's happening across China, people heading in droves to the cities. Even here in Yan'an, considered a backwater, there are over 2 million residents. Building its way to the top, the country accounts for more than 10% of the global spending on construction. Speak to almost anyone, and they will tell you life is better now than before. We met Jia Dongyuan, who remembers the arrival of the Red Army here. The exhausted soldiers had shoes made of straw, and the peasants like himself who greeted them were close to starvation. The buns he now buys every day were only for special occasions. Now, he says, worn-out clothes just get tossed away. You can just buy new clothes and shoes. Who mends their clothes these days? Young people are so lucky. But while everyone has benefited, some have benefited more than others. The newest residents to the cities, former farmers, tend to be the poorest.
Government can do a lot of things to help to stabilize the rural situation. And also government need to pay the education, the health care, and whatever. It's a public goods. So that is try to increase the farmers' real income.
The Communist Party once found legitimacy in its equal distribution of wealth. Today, maintaining economic growth has become its new right to power. Visitors, including modern-day soldiers, still flock to China's first utopia. But the first-generation revolutionaries might have trouble recognizing the country as it is today. Melissa Chan, Al Jazeera, Shanxi Province, China.
Well, recently I spoke to the Nobel Prize-winning economist Michael Spence and began by asking him how the communists had managed to turn the economy around.
So they kind of reinvented communism in 1978. And what they did basically is two things, and they're both incredibly important. First, they decided to use a kind of version of the market system with its incentives and let people who created some value keep some of it. It's kind of that simple. And the genius of that is they did it in agriculture, where 82% of the people lived. And so instantaneously, productivity improved and benefited 82%. There's none of this concentration of benefits, just everybody. And so they thought, well, this is a good idea, and gained some serious momentum from that. They then slightly more cautiously, but pretty persistently opened up the economy. Deng Xiaoping took the southern tour and opened the whole thing up. And then the growth just exploded.
And so here we are. China is verging on becoming the second largest economy in the world. It's an increasingly vocal and listened to part of the international conversation. What are the next 30 years, the next 60 years going to look like?
Well, it's very complicated. China's got to do several things that are all hard at once. Build a middle class, turn the growth engines over to the private sector and hope something happens. You know, plant 100,000 seeds and hope, 10,000 of them bloom into flowers. I mean, it's the complete opposite of, sort of the slightly more interventionist, we're going to get a bunch of labor-intensive industries going that has characterized the early stages of the labor-intensive manufacturing stage of growth in virtually every country that's grown at sustained high rates.
What policies are they going to base the future on? Because it's very interesting to see the kind of debate that's going on in the West right now. Traditional economists can't even agree on where the US financial system went wrong, let alone how to cure it, and yet they're trying to prescribe the future for China. How is Beijing going to make its decisions, and based on what?
Nobody really knows exactly how to do this, but there is some accumulated wisdom and experience that comes not only from research, but from actual experience. So there's really two challenges for governments when you enter this phase of growth, which we don't understand perfectly. One is to stop doing what you were doing before, okay? You have to let the labor-intensive industries die. And that's very hard to do. The natural tendency is to do what any human being would do, and that is once you find something that's successful, you keep doing it. So you have to accept that. And then you've got to stop doing the things that support it. Part of that's, you've got to let the exchange rate appreciate, because that's what produces the pressure that forces the structural change. And then you've got to, so you set that aside, and then you turn around and start investing in intangible assets like human capital and institutions that support them, and turn it over to the private sector.
Are you getting any sense that Beijing recognizes some of these imperatives?
Oh yeah, no, I don't have any doubt.
Counting the Cost returns in a moment with, among other things, a visit to Mexico, where employment's on the decline, poverty's on the rise, and the government wants to help by raising taxes. After the break, a controversial way to help Mexico's poor.